Welcome to the Quality Talks podcast. I'm Yan Kugel, your host, and my guest today is Paul Palmer. He's a pharmaceutical consultant and a business advisor. And today we are going to talk about time and task management. We're going to talk about how important it is for the pharmaceutical industry and give you insight into several techniques that you can implement to improve your time management skills. Hi, Paul. It's great to have you here again.
Hello, how are you today, Yan?
Yeah, I'm great. Thank you. Great. Great as much as one can be during these corona crazy times. You're afraid to leave the house, that somebody doesn't sneeze on you, but it's not that bad.
It's interesting here because I was intending to work more from home, so I'm working completely from home at the moment. I've got no choice. It'll be interesting times for a while.
Yeah, it will. So I had the idea actually not talk directly about GMP today, but about another very important topic, time and task management. What do you think?
Yes.
I thought about it because I remember when I just started my career, I went to a friend of mine. He was working for a while now. He was in IT in some institution, a government institution. And I asked him, okay, how do you manage your time, manage your tasks? So the answer he gave me was, what are you talking about? If I have to write down my tasks, it means I have too much work. And it didn't help me much, and I understood that there are many different types of industries, and the case for us is, of course, completely different, I would say, especially people who work in the quality assurance.
I think in general, the quality team is most of the time under-resourced, primarily because if you had more people than you need, well, there's nothing to fill the gap with. So in general, the number of batches that you can get through the process, you probably got the right amount of people for. But routinely, you'll get some deviations, you'll get some issues that you need to review, you'll get some things that you need to look at goods in. And for me, the hard part is actually the volume of work and what is the priority. So, for example, if you're in a contract organization, all the clients think that they should be the first priority. So say you've got 10 clients that are number one priority. Well, if you've got goods in issues on a delivery for some material that applies to all 10 of them, well, whose work do you prioritize first? Now, for me, the issue there becomes, well, who's shouting loudest normally? But the way that it really should be working, you should have a work schedule. You should have some sort of probably an ERP system that identifies what needs to be done first based on the schedule for the next step in the process.
Mm-hmm. From my experience, sometimes with if the system bugs you, it doesn't always means that somebody will do the work.
Yeah.
Right. It will be just okay. I have more important stuff to do. Right. So it's not always you cannot always trust the system. You also must have some responsibility, and you need to manage yourself.
Yes,
in a way.
I agree. I don't rely on the system myself. I use something that I learned back 27 years ago. So I went on a course that was run by the Pacific Institute, and it gave me a structure. So the structure was just a way to actually lay out a page. Of course, they had their own organizer, which they provided, which you had to buy refills for and everything. But they had a system so that you actually had you split your page. On the left hand side of the page, you put your calendar in the first section. Then you had your planned tasks, and at the bottom you had your planned phone calls. And then on the right hand side, you had to write down the activities that you completed. But in the action section, what you were doing, you were looking at importance and criticality. There's two categories. Is it important? Oh, importance and urgence.
Yeah, so there is it's like the Eisenhower matrix. Do you know it?
Yes.
It sounds very
Yeah, it's
familiar.
very similar.
Okay.
So the point being, you set the priorities and you work down them. But if something changes, you use the right-hand column. And then if you realize that you're not going to get something done on that day, because you've got a binder that goes next day, next day, next day, you've got the dates at the top, you never lose a task because you just diary it forward into the next date. And it was all predated so that you could actually use it going forward. Now, I use a similar system now. The calendar part of it I minimize. So the calendar part of it is usually maybe 20% at the top of the column, and the next part of it is the prioritization of the tasks, because it's not just about urgency and importance, because a lot of the time I'm looking at which ones can be done by somebody else. So the first thing,
so it's the Eisenhower matrix. It would be the urgent but not important, which it's the part where you could delegate.
Well, to be honest, I look for remove the task or delegate it before I look at prioritizing it. Or even if in some cases I've got other people separately employed to be able to do specific tasks, so I just give it direct to them. So I've routinely delegated the low level tasks. I was talking to a lady, Natasha, recently from Spiral Dynamics, and she was explaining to me how there's different levels of tasks. And in the process of doing the review, I said that I don't recognize that classification of tasks. And she says, but that's because you've already done the automation. And I said, yeah, it is. Because I'm operating already on the higher tasks. If it's the lower level ones, I've either delegated them or eliminated them already. So in my accounts, for example, I do a lot of automation. In my management of the business, the actual pharmaceutical consultancy, a lot of the time, the tasks, the scheduling, for example, I use an automatic scheduling tool. Now that links back into the client, so they can schedule the time that they need and pay for it if they need to at the time. And by automating rather than bringing another team member into it, I've actually got a better control than when I had my own PA, which I find quite amusing at times, because when I had my own PA, I used to give them so much work to do all the time. It's quite surprising that I can now automate it. And it's the same when you're doing something like TrackWise. So something like TrackWise, when you set it up with the default settings, there's a lot of steps in the process for deviations, for change control, whichever it is you're working on. But to actually improve the time management, I find that the best thing to do is to look at which steps you either can eliminate or you can have the system automate for you. So a good example would be the product information. So if you've got usually an item code and a batch number, and you have that linked over to your ERP system, then all you really need to do a lot of the time, if you've got unique batch numbers, is type in the batch number and the system brings everything for you, and you just click confirm. So rather than doing the typing, you may be saving, I would say you're probably saving a minute or two per item every time you're entering it. And that's just one example. And then working through your actual process management of it. Now, going from paper to EQMS, for example, a lot of the time the issues I see for paper-driven systems is people losing the documents or having to walk them around the business. Now, of course, in a pharma company, you could be walking quite a while to get from where you are through the changing process to the next building or to wherever the person's office is, to the person that you need to sign it. And then maybe you've got another 3 people that you need to look at it as well. So you're walking around and maybe they're not there, maybe they're in a meeting. So by using an electronic system to automate it and push the reviews and approvals around, you're saving all that time for the person raising the documentation. So personally, I think the elimination is the most important part to start with, because if the steps that are in the process that are not needed, you just get rid of them. Then you look at well, with the value-added tasks, can I automate some of them so that they go where they need to be? And that's part of business process mapping, because you want to make sure that you go from beginning to end with tasks that are value adding to actually what your process is. Does this all make sense?
Yeah, all makes sense. So I think let us, before we dive into the details and the different task management and time management techniques and what we can achieve with them, let us maybe discuss a bit why do we need it and why it's so crucial in the pharma industry. Because in the pharma industry we have so many deadlines that if they're not met, there can be dire consequences, and maybe not immediately, but it could lead to problems with regulators. So I find that most of the problems come also from standard operation procedures where companies set their own deadlines for certain activities, how long it takes for them to finalize a deviation or to complete a change, and they don't meet their own standards and their own standard operation procedures. So the question where it comes from, how can we avoid it, and where else do we see such situations? So I would say from my experience, it's mostly the deviations that usually stay open much longer than they should. Changes that are overridden.
I think it can be across all systems, to be honest.
Which one are the most crucial from your perspective?
I think CAPA, corrective and preventative actions, because while you haven't got your preventative actions in place, you're generating more deviations and more complaints.
Yeah, so it starts in from that. So if you look at the root cause analysis, you'll say that you say kappas, but before the kappas we have the deviations. That if we didn't attend them at time, then we don't have even the kappas.
Yeah, and in most cases, I find that the departments are doing the firefighting to be able to get the product out the door, so that they can supply, and they obviously they make the sales, but so that they can supply the patient. And a lot of the time, I think the actions that need to be made to actually make the improvements are often put on the back burner. So what I find is the prioritization usually goes to the one that is there to make the money. But the consideration for the actual how the process is operating, what's going wrong, is given a lower priority. And unfortunately, by doing so, you then impact the ability to make the money. Because if you're getting, I don't know, 20% rework, well, if you fixed whatever the problem is that's causing the rework, then you've got 20% more volume that's coming out that you can actually use. When after the kappas, then I would say that the deviations are not doing sufficient root cause analysis. So doing a superficial sign off rather than actually looking in depth, looking at the full root cause, so that you can generate the actions that are needed to do the improvement. And also involving more than one person. So a lot of the time it could be the person that finds it, or it could be the QC or the QA team member that's looking at the deviation and saying, is it acceptable or not? But many systems, many of the SOPs, like you said, are, rather than being driven by improvement, are driven by getting to the next stage, closing it out. How do we go from step to step to step? What's the fastest way through? And the volume that's involved in day-to-day running of a business often is prohibitive to actually take a deeper look at at each of the examples, especially the ones that are more important. Now, I remember back in when would it be? 2002, 2003, somewhere early 2000s. I joined a company that when I joined, they had a backlog of 3 years in closing out complaints. Now, it wasn't all of the complaints that were waiting for 3 years, but it was the ones with the actions pending, where they had a problem and they knew they had a problem, but nobody was actually saying, well, this is how we're going to resolve it. Um, and and even back then, the reason being, oh well, we referred it to so and so to look into, and they never came back with a solution, so we've just left it on the system. It was a global organization, and the pieces of paper were not necessarily pieces of paper because they did have a global database. It was being passed from one person to the next, but because they were never getting to the point of finding the root cause, then the complaints just were left open. The response had already gone back to the complainant, so they were not complaining. But the complaints themselves were being left open until they had some mechanism to close them out. And unfortunately, they were being dealt with at a low level by somebody that had minimal experience of the different processes and not that much influence with the people within the organization. So they couldn't go and just say, right, I need you to solve this and how we're going to do it. And I think partly the quality team were not pushing her to do so. So it was a paper shuffling exercise and spending time shuffling the paper to take the salary, but not really fixing the issues.
So I think it all comes down to urgency. If you cannot define your tasks and you cannot understand what are the urgent topics, you don't deal with them, because you can always find some way to get around and find another important topic which is actually not urgent and just time consuming, which doesn't bring you forward.
I find it's actually a lot of the time it's the urgent ones that are not so important that are the keep busy tasks.
Exactly. So what I wanted to say is urgent and important tasks, right? So yeah. So basically, the important tasks are being pushed away by urgent but not important tasks.
Yes.
Which you should delegate or schedule it for a different, much different time. But the important task you should really prioritize or plan them and always have a way to track them. Because if you forget them, they're gone. If you didn't write them down, they're gone. If you didn't communicate it further, it's gone. And I think there are sometimes important issues that people just maybe disregard them and hope that they just go away.
Hope they go away. But I think those are the ones that usually come back to bite you another
Exactly.
day.
But maybe some people say, oh, we'll deal with it when it comes, or maybe somebody plans already to be somewhere else and they don't care about it.
Yes.
But would you say that it's more of a management problem or unit-specific problems with the understanding what's important and what's not? Would you say that it's the management should be on top of that, or also the each worker, especially the QA, should also have the responsibility for that?
I think it's across the board. I don't think it's limited to quality assurance. I think it's across the board. I do think that the SOPs should be guiding people as to their priorities and how they manage them. But you can't tell everybody every single detail. Okay, the work instructions and the checklists will give you a direction. But which one of those checklists are you going to be doing first? Which work instruction from which product is the one that's the priority? You still have to have the human interaction. Like the work boards that you can use, like Kanban systems, like there's a whole range of different mechanisms, but it has to be consistent within the organization. Because if I'm using the system that I've got in place, but somebody else doesn't use the same system, maybe they use a fully electronic one, and somebody else just does the things that come to the front of the list first and doesn't have any priorities whatsoever. I think it's involving the team. It's involving cross-departmental. How are you going to set the priorities? If you're working with a number of clients, then how do you prioritize which one goes first? Well, probably through a schedule. If you're manufacturing yourself, well, obviously the first thing you've got to do is buy the materials. If somebody's got a new product that they want to put on the line and the purchasing team haven't put in the order, well, they're not going to go anywhere, are they? Or maybe they've not looked at the lead times. So they've put the order in, but then they realised that there was an 8-week lead time and didn't do the contract review at the other end. And they realised that they're actually going to be 12 weeks because they've got a site closure for 4 weeks. It on an individual basis, you need to set the priorities based on urgency and importance. But I think it's bigger than that. I think time management is just as much about fully resource management rather than just an individual's time. I see a lot of people failing to manage their time, but I think that a lot of the time it's because they've got no direction from their supervisors, from their managers, from the senior managers. And I think in most cases, I can't think of one where the objectives have been set on time. So you have your annual assessment, and then you find that your objectives for that year are set 3 months into the year because the senior management team couldn't agree theirs because they had the same schedule. And then the cascade down takes 3 months to get to actually have a result. So then you've got 9 months to hit your goals, hit your targets. Whereas if it was managed on an ongoing basis and they were revised, say monthly, quarterly, whatever suits for the business, at least reviewed, even if they're not revised. I know that's difficult with a larger organization because you always want coordination. But I think time's probably the most expensive resource any of us have got because it's something that you can never get back.
Yeah. And if you don't plan correctly, you just waste it.
Exactly. Yeah. Once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah. So that's why I also wanted to address this topic because I find it's really important because if you don't manage your time correctly, you have stress situations. It influences your health. It influences your work and the achievements of the team or the company. And I feel that in big organization, so I don't know, maybe even small organization, the tactics and the know-how to use specific time and task organizational tools are not addressed. So usually, so you are sent to many trainings. You're sent to technical trainings. You're sent to communication trainings, but actually to know how to prioritize your tasks and your time, especially if you work in a department where you have various projects that you have to manage. It's not just a day-to-day task like some QC jobs that you get a few tests per day and you must complete them, so you don't have to take it with you a week, 2, 3, and you don't need to look 3 months ahead. But when you work in such a position where you have to juggle many projects, many tasks, and you lack those skills, this knowledge, you can get lost. And I've seen many situations, many people that cannot manage such situations, and that's why I always strive to put my hands on as much and as many techniques as I can, because as a person, I don't do well with paper. When I mean paper, not with documentation, but with notebooks. When I have a notebook and I write there something, you can forget about it because probably this will stay. I write it down. 5 minutes, it's tucked away. Have no idea. So my technique, my tactic is just to make sure I have a laptop. I do everything in a digitalized way, and if I write something, I know that I must copy it in some task management system that I built for myself, for example, or So each one must find his own way. There are some people that are great with notebooks, and there are some people that it's a waste of time for them.
I find that notebooks are okay to record the task at the time, but not for doing the job at the end of it. And even the scheduler that I used to use, I've now got an electronic version of the same thing. So I use a digital paper, and I don't actually do anything different. I do the same structure. So it's just that I've got thousands of pages and I don't lose them.
Yeah. So you use this electronic notebook when you that you write as if on paper, and it automatically synchronizes it with your computer.
Exactly. Well, it sort of, it goes to the cloud and then you can email it to your
Okay, it's
computer.
perfect. So I guess it's perfect. It's an amazing solution. As I know, for people who use notebooks, there is also other systems like you mentioned. It's what you mentioned in the beginning. It's very similar to the bullet. If I don't know if you know it, a bullet journal. It's quite a famous. It became quite famous in the last few years. It's a guy that was his name was Ryder Carroll, and he had learning disabilities when he grew up, and he needed to develop a system to control his time, to control his tasks, and manage his activities. And he developed a system which includes writing all your tasks in your notebook. So you need to index your notebook in the beginning, like you did. You have a calendar, and then you need symbols, very simple symbols, like a dot is a task, a circle is an event, and when you finish the task, you do an X, and each week you need to review your tasks, and you need to copy them later to the next week. If the task was not finished, so the dot becomes an arrow, and it goes to the next week. And it's quite a famous technique now. I know that I try to use it. I use it short term, but still I need to transfer to some electronic system. But I think it's quite a great system for people who have nice writing, which I lack, and I think they should. Think about it. So bullet journal, that's the name. If somebody wants to look it up, I really can recommend it.
And I think all of these systems have the pros and cons for them, and what I found was I adapted my own version. So there was a certain way that you have to run it, and I just do it similar, but just not quite the same as the original instructions.
Yeah, it was the same for me. I read a lot of books, or let's say, better say, listened to a lot of books during my drive to work, and I listened to many books about the issues, and just combined many techniques from different people, from this Eisenhower metrics to the there's this getting things done system. It's also really famous that he says that you must write everything down, and I really agree with it, because I think that when you have a lot of stuff to do, you have a lot of projects, and if you don't write things down, you always keep thinking about it. In the way home, you're thinking about it, and I found myself always thinking about the task, what I didn't do. Oh, I forgot that. I need to do it tomorrow, and it always in your head. You're already home. You're with your wife, with your kids, but it's still in your head, and you always stress. But if you write it down, even in a task list, you're calm, because you know it's written, and I must say it's really works. Just write everything down. That's what I learned.
Mm-hmm. What I find is interesting is the actual act of writing. I find is better than the act of typing.
For the memory, maybe, right?
Yeah, I think so. I've tried to do several different ways where I've typed it instead. I've got Evernote, which I sync across all platforms, but I actually find I get better results with this digital paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the act of writing it. It commits it to memory, and you remember you've got to do it for the next day. I've tried both ways, and I just find writing it makes it better. Although for longer term, I do think you still need to transfer it to text.
So better because you can remember it better. It sticks with you for a longer time, or why?
I think so. I think when I type, I find that I type everything, and by the time I've got to the end of the list, well, I probably could have done half of the day. When I write it, I seem to get more focused because I don't want to write too much. Maybe. And or maybe it's just the act of writing. It brings the different part of the brain together, and you focus differently.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different people have told me that you're better off writing it. And Eric Lotham always used to say, "Journal, don't type. You have to have a written journal." Well, I when I've always had notepads, they've always disappeared, and I can never find what I've written anyway. So I much prefer having the electronic paper, which then converts to PDF.
Yeah. So does it transcribe what you write in printed letters?
Yeah.
It's perfect. What's it called? The paper?
It's Remarkable.
Remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's from Germany, of course. And there's a lot of different ones on the market, but the difference I found with the Remarkable is you're not getting any interruptions. So all you've got is the writing function. You haven't got the Skype popping up. You haven't got Facebook telling you should be doing something else. You haven't got another. If you're on a laptop or you're on an iPad or something, there's always something popping up to distract you.
Yeah, that's right.
Whereas I found whereas I found the Remarkable, because there's not got the option of installing anything, you can focus on the work. You can focus on the writing. And at the moment, it's my favorite option.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I'll change going forward, but that's just the one that I prefer at the moment. I did my last audit using it.
Yeah.
So I generated because I like to have quite large space text on the Remarkable. I got through about 140 pages in a 4-day audit. Handwritten notes. Now you get back and the transcription's not perfect, of course, because you're writing away and you're not necessarily thinking about what you're writing. You're thinking about what you're doing in the task at hand. But it did save me time because it converted probably 75% of it correctly.
And then you need to correct it.
Yeah, manually. I corrected it manually afterwards. And to be honest, when I'm handwriting it, I don't structure it the way I want it in the final report anyway. Maybe I will do one day going forward, but at the moment I don't. I think what I need to do is consider how much, when I'm doing my preparation and thinking about the topics that I want to cover in the audit, maybe I actually pre-prepare it with different pages. I'm not sure yet. Because what I was considering was you can write a line at the top and just add another page, and you can have as many pages as you want. But when you're auditing, you don't necessarily follow the same route all the time. You might have your checklist that gives you a general path, but if you find a specific problem, you want the opportunity to go further into that.
Yeah.
So that's why I resist it a little bit.
Yeah, I find it's a great solution for audits because also if you go with checklists, so you have like too many papers, and then you're looking, searching for something that you written for yourself, or you're jumping between the questions. And if you have something electronic with you, it's much easier to stay on track. And when you write down it, you don't always have to manually go through the pages. It just writes it down conveniently in the next page, right?
Yeah. You just got two buttons at the bottom. You click forward and backwards.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I guess. Yeah, I find it great because now that we have the smartphones and this, the idea of the smartphone, let's get everything in one device. But the problem is, like you said, is distraction.
Mm-hmm.
You get distracted from everything.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you just want to split stuff.
If on the phone, one that I've started using recently is called Otter. So it's voice transcription. So it types as you talk.
But is it good?
I've only just started using it, but it seems to work. It seems to work okay. I think it'll probably be impacted by accent, and I think there'll be some corrections to do at the end of it. But you can see it typing as you go along, and it's bringing up the correct text. So we'll see.
So yeah, it's really good that you're British, and so you don't have a problem with the accents.
Yeah,
you have the original one.
I do, but most of these softwares are written for American accents, unfortunately.
I try to use one. I think it also uses some learning algorithms that it tries to recognize your speech patterns. But I think if people are not really native speakers at the beginning, it doesn't work that well.
Yeah, I used to use Dragon Speech, Dragon Dictate. It's Dragon Dictate on laptop and Dragon Speech on the Mac, and it's okay once you've done the training. It works well once you've done the training, but in the first instance, there's quite a bit of fixing to do as you go along. But then that's how it learns. You have to teach it, don't you?
Yeah, like everything else. So, what other tips can you give?
For time management, set your priorities. If you set priorities and realistic timescales, don't set the time that you're going to do a task just because somebody says they need it to be done by this particular date, because you usually find that you underestimate the amount of time it's going to take and you overestimate what you can actually deliver. So it's always a good idea to plan to finish something early. So when I'm committing to something to actually do it on a schedule, I try to say, if I think it's going to take me a week, then I'll probably give a week and a half deadline, because everybody's happy if you deliver early, but people complain if you deliver late.
Yeah, so always said like 30% is because you don't know what comes between.
Exactly. And then the hardest part for me for time management is saying no, because there's always somebody that's got a high priority, something that needs doing. And if you're at a desk and they can walk up to you, it's very hard to say, no, I can't do it now, I'll do it in a later date. And I think a lot of people get caught out by the interruptions.
Yeah. I'm really familiar with that because I'm also trying to be the nice guy, also always help the others. But I think with the time, I also learned that you should also prioritize what's important and urgent for you, and sometimes when something important for somebody else, it's not always the best your best interest of the best interest of your company or your supervisor, because when you have a supervisor, what's important for him, it's automatically important for you, and it doesn't matter. So that's how it works.
I remember I used to work with a QP who used to have a screensaver on, and it was he always used to have, a failure to plan on your part does not mean it's an emergency on mine. And it always amused me, and it was the way that he worked, because he was methodical. He'd go through his batches in the specific order, and in doing so, he would get he'd do the full review. But if you interrupted him, if he would let you interrupt him, then he got off track, and it would take him longer to do the job. So it was his way of coping with the volume of work that he had, because he was consistently bombarded with batch after batch after batch.
Yeah. You need to know yourself and what's your difficulties in such a way, because I think do you know how it's called? Eat the frog.
Eat that frog, yes.
Yeah, eat that frog.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly. So I think
I listened to that one.
Yeah, you try.
I put it.
You
Yeah,
was it?
I got the PDF on my Mac, and I just got
Okay,
it to
listen
read.
to the book.
I
Okay.
just got it. I got it to read it out for me.
Right. So basically, what it says, do the thing you hate the most first.
And it works.
Yeah.
It works because then you're enthusiastic to do the other parts later anyway.
Exactly, because you also don't dread. If you put it aside, you sit the whole day and you just, oh no, I need to do it. But if I need to do it later, oh no, let's do something else. But if it's important and but you still hate it, just do it the first thing in the morning and forget about it. The day will be much better.
Yep, and you get more. You probably get more endorphins by having finished the negative thing first, and you got the opportunity to work on the good things that you like doing later.
Exactly. So did you? I actually I didn't. I read about the technique, about the idea, but I never read the book. So you finished listening to it, or still on the way? Yeah.
Oh no, it took me 2.5 hours to get through the whole book.
Okay. So the idea is simple, but is there much more in the book?
There's a bit more about setting priorities, but it really is about doing the things that you don't want to do first. It's about not trying to do the whole task. So if you've got the same for how do you eat an elephant, it's the same as eat the frog. How do you eat an elephant? A piece at a time. And the principle is that you look at how you can break down the activities into bite-sized chunks, and don't focus on the end goal because it distracts you from doing the task now. If you've got something that's going to take less than 10 minutes, you don't put it into your schedule, you just do it.
Yeah, exactly. That is one. If you get you have tasks, look for them. So exactly when you get also that's what I did when I got an email. I know it's important task. So my system was like that. When I got emails, I always worked with OneNote. I find it as a great tool because you can synchronize it with everything, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. So you can you can send your emails there. You can set tasks. You can synchronize it with your calendar. And what I did when I got emails, I look at the emails. If it's a big project, I send it to the incoming. So I had there. I worked according to the getting things done theory. So you should have like an incoming box, and then you need to look at this incoming box and then just organize it according to the priorities, short tasks, longer tasks, and so on. And I did it electronically with OneNote, and always when I get an email and I go through it, if you can do it in, I think for me it was like 3 minutes thumb rule. Just do it directly, and then it's gone. It's done.
And a technique for managing email is you have the frequency that it checks your email on Microsoft Outlook. So if you want to be not getting interrupted so much, so that you can plan to have half an hour or hour, you're supposed to be able to concentrate consistently for 20 minutes, and it's more effective. So you just put your refresh time on your email on your Outlook system for 20 minutes. So you'll get something done in that 20 minutes, and then you'll get all the emails that are coming into your inbox, and then you'll get the next lot in another 20 minutes. And it breaks it down into chunks and means that you're not getting constantly interrupted.
Yeah, that's also a really good idea. Can you actually change it also without the admin rights? I think so. Should be able to do it.
It depends on the organization. Some set it up so that you can't, and others set it up so you can.
Yeah, but that's also a good idea. I find that also when I do personal projects, so I get distracted really easily, like this. So I really need to make sure when I start thinking about stuff, I automatically, my hands already automatically click on stuff in the web. Suddenly, I have no idea how I got there. I'm suddenly in Facebook. have no idea how I got there, or in the news. So I remember, especially when I was writing my master thesis back then. I use a plugin that blocks your internet. You said, okay, block the internet for this amount of time, or you can add some specific rules. No distraction, like no Facebook, no news, no YouTube, no stuff like this. And I find it great because if there are people like me that are getting distracted easily, they should use such techniques, as you said. But it's a really great idea. Block your emails for 20 minutes, because for me, I always see emails. I need to read it.
Have a look at it.
Yeah.
Rather than, well, if it was that urgent that they rung you, is how I always think. If they're not going to send a phone call, if they're just going to send an email, well, then they're allowing you to come back in a certain period of time. It's not immediate. So, but another thing that I do find useful when you're working with teams is to set a rhythm. So if you routinely have a 5-minute call at the beginning of the day, or a huddle, I think some people call it. You have a 5-minute discussion for what's needed for the day, what's
Huddle
changed from the
is
previous.
like from the Game of Thrones.
Sorry, the Game of
like
Thrones.
Huddle, no.
Oh no, huddle like
Huddle.
this, like you all get together.
Ah, okay.
Like in rugby, you all get together, but it's not literally getting that close. It's just you. It's usually stood up. Another name for it in IT is stand-ups. So you have the team that are working on a specific project or from a specific department. They get together the first 5 minutes. Of course, you want everybody to be on time because you're only doing 5 minutes anyway. You go around the team, and usually the leader gives an update as well. And you just go from there. And it's just a management technique. But the idea is that maybe you have these 5 minutes a day at the beginning of the day. Maybe you have 2 specific meetings at different times in the week that are on certain topics. And you just have a routine. So the idea is that the rhythm that you develop is focused around completion and feedback and the planning periods. And in that way, you actually achieve more because everybody's got the same focus. Because part of the problem that you'll find is that you've got a team of 30 people, and theoretically you're all aiming to achieve the same goal. But what one person thinks they need to do today, it might actually conflict with what somebody else is doing. So often you've got a limited amount of machinery. You might have limited equipment that you can use. And if you have a routine that at the beginning of the day, this is what I'm planning, that's what they're planning, that's what they're planning, and you know that, well, you can't do what you were planning because you know that they'll be using the computer, the lifting equipment, whatever it might be for their activity, then you can consider what you should be doing instead. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes completely sense. So it's like the water cooler theory, right?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of research about it, and the statistics shows that people who take more coffee breaks with their peers actually achieve more work because they get more time to communicate to each other. They teach each other things. They talk about the priorities in the office, and it really helps the organization. And the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes that people sometimes spend together in the coffee breaks, and I know that maybe some employers discourage this, but it actually helps the organization, helps people to get synchronized with each other and support each other, ask questions, get answers, right?
And build a relationship, because people will work together well with somebody that they know, but they a lot of the time are hesitant to go and ask somebody that they've never spoken to before.
Yeah, exactly. So people would also be much reluctant to help each other if they actually spend a bit of time doing some leisure stuff, even if it's just drink a cup of tea or go to lunch together.
Maybe communication can be the topic for the next podcast.
Yeah, exactly. It's always it comes everything communication in the pharma where there are so many moving parts, so many departments. I find it crucial. If people do not communicate correctly, do things because they just find it right for themselves. So it would be a great topic. So it always comes to my mind. Especially somebody who comes from the QA, I know that there are some people in the QA that are happy to write an SOP, throw it on the table, and say work according to it, and it leads to disasters.
Yeah, because they've never spoken to
because they
anybody
never
that's gonna do the
spoken,
work.
and that's only one example.
Definitely.
Yeah. Great. So, Paul, I didn't ask you that question last time. If people want to contact you to get some consulting from you, how can they reach you?
Well, to be honest, the easiest way is through LinkedIn. So if you go onto LinkedIn, it's Paul R. Palmer, and just send me a direct message on there. I find the volume of email that I get, I actually see the messages on LinkedIn faster than the email.
Especially that you have 20 minutes limit, so it comes exact 50 at a time.
Well, to be honest, my notifications are turned off, so I actually go to the email when it suits me and the work that I'm doing. So I don't even have the 20 minutes. I go and look at it when I want to. The other way, my website is paulrpalmer.com. And it's paul@paulrpalmer.com. So it's quite simple. But to be honest, LinkedIn, it's my company is Paul R. Palmer Limited, and if you put in Paul R. Palmer, it comes up within the first 2 or 3 normally.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paul. That was, as usual, an interesting conversation.
Have a good time. Yeah. You too. Have a good day.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Qualitox podcast. If you did, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.